This meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 72 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Sorry for the delay because of the votes. So today we are continuing our study of the exploitation scheme targeting certain international students. Before we begin that, I would just let all the members know that because of the time period and services were not available for this meeting beyond 6:15, so I've asked the clerk to cancel the second panel. Though they were coming in person, we have the officials in. They were coming virtually for the second panel, so that's why I have kept the first panel as they are in person and have cancelled the second panel. So today I would like to welcome two senior officials from the Canada Border Services Agency, Mr. Aaron McCrory, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement, and Mr. Carl Desmarais, Director General, Enforcement. Thanks and welcome. Sorry for the delay. You had to wait for an hour almost here. With that, we can go with your opening statement. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin, and then we will go into round of questioning. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss today the challenges of fraudulent student documents. I would like to give you an overview of the CBSA's mandate under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, or IRPA, with respect to protecting the integrity of the immigration system. The admission of international students to Canada is a shared responsibility between the CBSA, IRCC, and the Immigration and Refugee Board, or IRB. The system includes a number of layers of defense to ensure the integrity of our immigration system. First of all, applicants are required by law to answer truthfully all questions asked in the context of their immigration application. They are also responsible for all the information and documentation contained in their application. Second, the IRCC is responsible for reviewing, validating, and approving study permit requests made from overseas. You heard last week about their efforts in this space to combat fraudulent documentation. Third, the CBSA will verify the admissibility of applicants at the port of entry and issue the study permit once satisfied of the applicant's admissibility. Finally, the CBSA conducts intelligence-driven inland investigations into possible fraud. In terms of those inland investigations, the CBSA is responsible for gathering intelligence to identify patterns of concern, then based on those patterns, gathering evidence and assessing on a case-by-case basis possible inadmissibility and presenting those allegations to the IRB. The IRB, which is an independent tribunal, will hear the case, weigh the evidence presented by both sides, and make a determination of admissibility. If the applicant is found inadmissible, the IRB is responsible for issuing the removal order. The law and jurisprudence is clear. Persons who misrepresent themselves to seek entry to Canada or to remain in Canada are contravening IRPA and risk being removed from the country. But there are other mitigations in place. All individuals who are ordered removed have access to due process and can challenge removal orders through various levels of recourse, as well as access to the federal court. And as you heard last week from our two colleagues at IRCC, they have tools like the temporary resident permit to restore status and effectively stay removals. Once the IRB has found an applicant inadmissible and all avenues of recourse have been pursued, the CBSA has a statutory obligation to remove foreign nationals as quickly as possible. As the committee is aware, currently there are a number of active IRPA investigations into cases of misrepresentation involving students. In 2018, the CBSA was investigating organized crime groups and became aware of issues with students not attending school and getting involved in criminality and gangs. This led to new lines of inquiry, which ultimately, based on tips we got from the public in 2020, led us to identify over 2,000 cases where fraudulent documents may have been used to obtain a student visa. In collaboration with IRCC, we reviewed those cases where you can see the layers of defense working. As you heard last week from our IRCC colleagues, these cases of interest, those 2,000 cases of interest, were narrowed down to 1,485 study permit applicants, of which 970 applications were refused. And then 440 applications were approved, indicating the number of possible students in Canada. Of those 440 applications, we have identified a little over 300 cases of concern. This compares to the 817,000 student permits that have been issued since 2020. The investigations so far have found that about half of the 300 were genuine students who came to Canada to study. For the other half, we have no evidence that they were genuine students, and that will require further review. And we found some instances where individuals were engaged in criminal activity. As announced last week, a task force of IRCC officials is working closely with the CBSA to identify genuine students by assessing each case's specific circumstances. For these cases, we are pausing removals to allow the review to take place. Those who are found to be genuine students will be issued a temporary resident permit to allow them to continue their journey in Canada. Others will continue to benefit from all the due process and protections that are in place. The CBSA's mandate under the IRPA is about upholding the integrity of Canada's immigration system. Doing so allows the government to protect the 250,000 students who choose to come to Canada each year by providing them with a path that is honest and fair. By working with others like IRCC and the IRB, we can ensure that we have a system that is rigorous, fair, and compassionate. Thank you, and we welcome questions from the members.
Thank you. With that, we will go to our round of questioning, and we will begin with Mr. Kimmich for 6 minutes. Mr. Kimmich.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned tips, you used the word plural, but IRCC, the Deputy Minister, the Assistant Deputy Minister said tip, one tip. So which one is it? Was this like a series of tip-offs that the CBSA got, or was it just one? And it's 2020, or are there other years in which you got them as well?
So in this particular case, my apologies, it was a tip in 2020 that led us to look in particular documents, verifying the validity of them, and from that led to about two, as I say, that. Where did the tip come from? The tip came. It came in through our general. We've got a tip line, the Border Watch line, where it came in.
So it was just an anonymous tip from the public
concern,
that came
in? It was an indication of a concern with an overstay.
Okay, and then but you said there were tips as well, because you mentioned organized crime groups, and that was kind of the language that was used both by the minister and by officials from the department. Can you elaborate more on that?
We'll have a number of active investigations, both on the from an administrative point of view, from a criminal point of view, but also from an intel point of view, looking into the integrity of the immigration system. Each of them on their own will generate new information. So in 2018, we became concerned with what we were seeing in terms of a pattern of individuals coming into Canada, potentially using the student visa process to join criminal gangs. That in turn led to us looking more closely at the student visa process, a tip in 2020 that led to these particular
and then
cases.
That's how so the CBSA is the one that identified the 2,000 potential cases, not IRCC?
Working with IRCC.
Working with, but you were the lead agency on that?
Correct.
Okay, so are you confident then that you've identified all of the fraudulent cases?
In this particular instance,
Yeah.
I'd say the numbers are always going to be subject to change as we continue our investigations, as we dig into this further, and there may be other instances that we're not aware of. That's why we continue our investigations.
So you're still investigating this particular type of fraud that was committed against these students?
Well, we've tied it back to a single, like a source, if you will, of the documentation. But this is a larger issue with ongoing concerns. So
going through files, going back on these 800,000 plus study permits that have been issued?
No, we looked at 2,000 cases. We've narrowed. Those are the cases we stopped. Yeah.
So you're not going to continue checking into, or are these 2,000 cases because they're all related to the same consultants that committed this fraud against?
It's all related to the same consultant. We have about 6,000 active investigations underway at any one time. So it's a going concern in terms of the integrity.
Can I ask you, is it a standard practice once you do identify education consultants or fraud, the scamster immigration consultants, is a notice sent out to CBSA officers so they're aware of it when they look at someone at the border and look at the documentation to try and identify if perhaps that name appears anywhere on the documents? We
do share information. We do have border watch lists. I'm not sure in this particular instance that we did that.
Okay. Can I ask you then about school administrators? Because I have an email here between CBSA and a school administrator for international admissions. This one is with Seneca College. And how often does this type of exchange happen? Because this is 3 years after the fact in this particular case that I have on my tablet. So how often do officers communicate with colleges to verify whether an admissions letter is actually real or not?
I wouldn't be able to give you a hazard a guess in terms of how often it occurs. As part of the normal investigative practices, one way of confirming the validity of a letter would be to confirm with the educational institution.
So when IRCC, through the portal, right, that person provides an application, does CBSA at that point, when it's an international student getting a study permit, does CBSA do a secondary review to validate whether that acceptance letter is a real letter, or if the students are being defrauded? Or do you only check after, once it's a permanent resident application? Because in each case I have here, it's a permanent residency application.
Again, in terms of roles and responsibilities, as the IRC is responsible at that stage of the initial application to assess the validity of the documents, and that's their roles and responsibilities, and you've heard in terms of what they do to combat fraudulent documents. The particular role that we played in this case is the inland investigation. So post-arrival, we've received tips and information that have led us down an investigative path that led us to conclude that there were fraudulent documents being used. And that's why I speak about the layers of defense. I think you can't rely on a single layer of defense. You've got that the requirement on the students to complete their applications completely and honestly. The second layer of defense is the IRCC reviewing the application itself. And then we come in and do an investigation. Based on information, may do an investigation.
Can I ask you, has any college ever reached out to you proactively on cases where they find out that a student comes to them, says that they're a student, turns out they're not, they've been scammed? Has any college ever reached out to the CBSA at your level or levels proactively to tell you there's something going on here?
I'm not aware of any, but
Well, if I may, Madam Chair, we receive tips and we receive information from a variety of sources via different mechanisms that we have, including the border watch line. So to say specifically about that particular issue, I wouldn't be able to tell, but we do receive frequently some tips from a variety of different sources.
What colleges specifically?
It would not necessarily preclude colleges.
Okay. When you found out about these 2,000 cases, was there an internal investigation done by CBSA about how some of these students are able to cross the border? I have at least one study permit where the birthday on the visa doesn't match the birthday on the acceptance letter. And I would have thought that at the border, that's something that a CBSA officer would have just obviously glaringly caught, that the two don't match. So was there an internal investigation done about what went wrong?
I'm not familiar with the specific example that you're talking about. You'd have to, bear in mind that we'll have 33 million people arriving in Canada in any given year. And so our frontline officers do their very best to confirm the validity of every document they see, but 33 million documents is a lot to review.
Thank you. Time is up, Mr. Kimmich.
Juste un petit point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, I didn't want to interrupt my colleague. And there was a lot of back and forth between the both, and it's very difficult for the interpreters. If we could at least have a pause so people aren't talking over each other, because honestly, I can follow you when I'm in the room, but for people who are watching, sometimes they can't have all the information in the language of their choice if there's overlap.
We will now proceed to Ms. MP Ali. MP Ali, you will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you to officials for appearing before the committee, and thank you for your service to Canada. You did explain that how you received that tip, and I understand that's how the investigation started on this. So what sort of information was provided to CBSA that led them to uncover this issue of large-scale misrepresentation?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. What I will say is that we received information indicating that an individual was possibly overstaying their time in Canada, and that prompted us to look more deeply into their file, their circumstances, how they came into the country. But I will not get into the kind of the specifics of investigation, and given that those are the techniques we use to find fraudulent behavior.
Thank you. The media have reported that there are approximately 700 students in this situation. The situation being that they are being accused of having studied in Canada using fraudulent documents. These students claim to be victims, but the investigation seems to suggest that some of the students knowingly took advantage of Canada's immigration system. Is this 700 numbers accurate? What is the breakdown of the students who are deemed to be victims versus those who are non-genuine? I know you have did mention it, but can you expand on that, please?
Thank you for the question. The 700 is a bit of a mystery. We're not sure what the source of that number is. As I noted, when we launched this investigation, we identified about 2,000 files of concern. We then worked with our colleagues at IRCC to further refine that, and that's where we identified 1,485 study permit applicants that may have involved fraudulent documents. That resulted in the cancellation of about 900 student permits, and we identified about 440 applicants whose permits had been approved and who were here in the country. That then leads to a number of about 300 where we are concerned that the individuals may have had fraudulent documents. Of those, and I really want to caution around the numbers because it is an active investigation and so they are subject to change. But of those, about 50% appear to have been genuine students, some who made real concerted efforts when they arrived at school and found out they hadn't in fact been admitted to the college or the university, made real concentrated efforts to reestablish their status as a student and become a student. In about, again, the numbers are going to fluctuate, but 45, 50% of the cases, we have no evidence at all that there was an attempt for the individual to go to school. So we're going to dig into those cases further to understand what the exact circumstances are. And there's about, I'm going to say about 3%, so about 10 files that of that 300 where we've found individuals who were involved in criminal behavior. Now there could be overlap between those numbers as well, and I just want to emphasize they are subject to change, but that is exactly the work of the task force that IRCC has set up, will be to go through those 300 files and understand the exact status of each individual.
Thank you. So just to be clear, that's a 700, as you said, is a mystery, and it's just close to the 300 students who may be active dealing with this issue. What effort are being made by Canada to stop these fraudulent actors abroad who take advantage of students seeking to study in Canada?
Thank you for the question, and this is why I think it's important to talk about the layers of defense. And our colleagues last week here at the committee talked about the efforts that are being done on the part of the IRCC, both overseas and here domestically. And the layer of defense where we become involved is here in Canada doing inland investigations. We like to think that we're intelligence driven. So we have an intel function that tries to seek information, identify patterns of concern, and use that information then to drive investigations. We have two types of investigations that we undertake, those that are administrative or tied to the regulations, but we'll also do criminal investigations that are primarily focused on those who are large-scale attempts at fraud and those who are facilitating the fraud rather than those who are victims of the fraud. Those are the layers of defense. It's a constant game. As we refine and get better at detecting fraud, those who want to benefit from our system will seek other ways of circumventing the measures that are put in place. And so it's a continual effort that we learn with each instance that we work through and refine our measures further and continue our efforts. I think as well then the role of students. They have that initial responsibility in terms of completing their documentation, and they feel that they're being a victim of fraud, that they should report that to us so that we can take additional action.
Okay, thank you. I just have, I think, 20 seconds or 30? Yeah. I had another, if you want to add something more to it for 15, 20 seconds, that'll be great.
I just say again that the importance of the students, for example, who may suspect they have been provided fraudulent documents, to share that information with us so that we can proactively then launch additional investigations and tackle this problem.
Thank you. With that, we will now go to Mr. Brunel Decept for 6 minutes. Mr. Brunel Decept.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for being here for our study. We really needed to hear you speak to this. You said in your opening statement and also in responding to some questions that you had investigation techniques and specific rules to determine what consisted fraud. Who sets out these rules? Who sets out these rules?
Merci pour la question. Thank you for the question. I'm not sure I understand in terms of who sets out the rules. We set out kind of investigate. We provide our investigators guidelines in terms of how and when to conduct investigations. Those are that is the function of our organization at CBSA. But they are then seeking to ensure compliance with the IRPA regulations and legislation. So we guide how our investigators do their work, and they're doing assessments against legislation and regulations.
Tout ce que je voulais savoir, est-ce
Right. So were these guidelines updated since we've been talking about this file? This file with regards to some Indian students, or are the guidelines the same and we're dealing with what we have?
I would say our guidelines are constantly evolving. They're evolving in at least two different respects. One is as I noted, the efforts or the attempts to engage in fraud evolve over time. So we need to provide new and additional guidance to our frontline staff in terms of detection techniques, but also in terms of how we do case management, where we set our priorities. That's also a constantly evolving product. So it is part of managing the program is a constant evolution to make sure that we're focusing on the right things and we're giving our staff the right tools to address the challenges that we're facing.
Donc, logiquement,
So logically, what we're experiencing today might bring about change within your organization for the investigations that will happen in the future.
Absolutely.
Parfait.
We're always trying to learn.
le ministère de l'Immigration
So the Immigration Department lately, I believe in September 2022, responded to a report from IRCC on the inequity between the African Francophone students and the rest of the foreign students, and they admitted that there was systemic racism within the department when it came time to process applications for Francophone African students. What concerns me is that the same discriminatory criteria are being used when we're in order to determine if there was fraud or not in the file of a student. So I just want to make sure that within your organization, because the government admitted that there was systemic racism within IRCC for the processing of some applications, I would like to be reassured. Do you think that there is racism or an unconscious bias within your organization when it's time to deal with fraud cases? And I'm asking you to expand on this because a lot of people are listening and they'd love to hear you speak to this.
I think, especially around issues of systemic racism, it's a constant struggle that we always have to be focusing on that and asking ourselves that question, how we're doing as an organization. I would say that the processes that we have in place, though, we do have safeguards. So our system isn't designed around an individual being able to make an arbitrary decision about what investigations to pursue and what action to take with that. We have a system of safeguards in place, including management oversight, review by ministerial delegates, and the guidance that I've talked to help ensure that we avoid any challenges around systemic racism.
Est-ce qu'il y a des formations?
Is there any type of training provided within your organization with regards to unconscious bias? Sometimes it's unconscious racism, and that's what we're talking about here. It's not necessarily the fault of the agent that's dealing with a file with regards to fraud or a foreign student file. So are you providing training with regards to unconscious bias?
Turn to my colleague.
Oui, tout à fait.
Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, we can provide. There is training that's provided for frontline workers and our agents.
Excuse-moi.
It's really important to have this type of training within the government. So it's not the first time that we see these types of fraud cases with regards to students. It's not the first time that students are also the victims of fraud. I believe that it has happened in the past with Haitian students as well, students from Francophone Africa. And now here we are in a committee about this disastrous issue, disastrous for many Indian students. But all of a sudden, the government is implementing specific measures for this file that we're studying because these students were victims. How is it possible that in the past, these types of occurrences have happened with regards to African students, Haitian students, and there were never specific measures implemented by the government? How can you explain this? Is there not there proof of discrimination between students coming from different countries compared to students coming from India?
It'll be hard for me to comment. I'm not familiar with those previous cases, but what I would say is, in fact, I think the system is working as it should. I think there are safeguards in place to avoid issues around, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of there being unconscious bias and potential for systemic racism. We've got safeguards against that. But the immigration system as a whole, we play a role in terms of gathering information and putting forward an allegation. It's just that. It's not our decision. The IRB then makes a decision. And the IRB is an independent decision maker who has the ability to make a decision and then reach a conclusion. After that, there are other safeguards that are in place, including appeals, recourse to the federal court, the ability to get a pre-removal risk assessment, et cetera, that protect the rights of the individuals involved.
Time is up, Mr. Brunel de Sepp. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the officials for coming to our committee today. I'd like to actually just go back to the numbers just a little bit. The minister and officials came last week and indicated that of the 304 people that's been flagged as a potential issue on misrepresentation, 57 of them received the removal order from the IRB. And your number seems to indicate that is higher than 57. So I just want to circle back on that number on 57. Is the 57 number correct for this cohort of students?
So again, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Again, I think we want to be very careful about the numbers. This is a live investigation. We are working with our IRCC colleagues in the task force in real time. And so what I would say is the numbers are subject to change. Today I could tell you that we've got 52 removal orders that have been issued.
52.
52.
So does that mean to say that the 57 number, that means that the ones, the discrepancy is such that those other students it's no longer faced with a removal order, so that means it's now been eliminated, or it's just that there's just a simple discrepancy in number?
Yeah, I think it's the best information available at that moment in time is what I have to say.
I see. Okay. CBSA, of course, enforces deportation orders. And so in this instance, for the students that's been identified, some of them are awaiting meetings with CBSA. So will CBSA be having these separate meetings with them, or will they be rolled into part of the task force investigation?
So for those individuals, and just to bear in mind that the universe of potential people being removed from Canada is considerably larger than the 300 that we're talking about here, or even the 52. But of the individuals implicated in this case, we're going to put them through the task force process to understand exactly what their status is. Were they a legitimate, genuine student or not? And at that point, then we will be closing the loop with the individuals involved.
Okay, so they won't be having to do both meetings then, sort of doing a meeting with the task force and then an additional with CBSA. I'm just trying to determine, are we duplicating effort here? Are the students having to sort of meet with both CBSA separately and then go through the task force process separately?
What I would say, I don't anticipate the task force meeting with the students, although they may meet with officials to gather information about their particular cases. In particular, if we don't have evidence that they had attended a school, we will give the people the opportunity to provide that information.
So that means that the meetings will be ongoing. So they will be meeting with CBSA separately from the task force?
Conceivably.
Thank you. All right. Madam Chair, at this juncture, I'd like to actually raise the issue on a point of privilege. As you recall, Madam Chair, I flagged the issue around the press release and the discrepancy around the press release. And it's very upsetting to me that this has occurred. I note that you have since sent an email to all committee members with your explanation. However, your explanation, frankly, does not resolve the issue, in my view. Just by way of background, Madam Chair, on June 5th, I moved the following motion. That following news reports that international students admitted into Canada with valid study permits were issued fraudulent college acceptance letters by immigration consultants and are now facing deportation. The committee issued a news release to condemn the actions of these fraudulent ghost consultants and call on the Canada Border Service Agency to immediately stay pending deportations of the affected international students, waive inadmissibility on the basis of misrepresentation, and provide an alternate pathway to permanent residency or a broad regularization program. That motion was subsequently amended by MP Suk Dhaliwal to add the following: that the committee invite the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship for 1 hour, the Minister of Public Safety for 1 hour, and department officials for 1 hour each to provide briefing on the situation for a total of 4 hours. And that amendment was passed unanimously, Madam Chair. Following that debate, the Conservative member, MP Brad Redekop, moved an amendment to change the language of my motion with the language to say provide an alternate pathway to permanent status for those impacted, to provide a pathway to reapply for permanent residency for those impacted. I objected to that proposed amendment, and after some debate with the committee, that amendment was called to a vote with a recorded vote, and it failed. It was defeated. And there was some other ongoing discussion, but ultimately, the motion that was finally passed unanimously incorporated my wording of the motion along with the amendment proposed by MP Dhaliwal. I won't belabor the point in terms of what that language is. I already put that on the record. Then on June 14th, 1 week following the adoption of that motion, committee members received a copy of the press release from the clerk. And to my dismay, the release does not reflect the language of the motion passed. In fact, it misconstrued the actual motion that was passed. It contained information that was not part of the motion, and namely, it indicated that the committee will begin a study on the issue, Madam Chair, and moreover, and more critically from my perspective, it omitted critical language, that being that the call for the government to waive inadmissibility based on misrepresentation and to provide an alternate pathway to permanent residency to the international students. That language was not incorporated. There was clearly editorial measures taken with the drafting of that press release. So, Madam Chair, after I raised that with you, as indicated, you sent committee members an email on June 19th. So we received your email, and your explanation is as follows, and I quote, "The text was drafted with the intention of providing a coherent, accurate, and faithful news release based on the information available at the time, and the motion adopted by the committee on June 7th. As chair, I approved this draft and instructed staff to publish it, and then you went on to say that it is regrettable that all members of the committee were not satisfied with the final form of the press release." So, Madam Chair, so what's clear is that, Madam Chair, is that you directed for this press release to be issued. And that press release does not reflect the direction from the committee. It omitted, as I indicated, critical information. It editorialized other information that you perceived to be valid for the press release. And to that end, Madam Chair, I believe that all of the committee's members' privilege has been violated. In the past, where press releases were issued, such as, for example, I cite my good colleague sitting next to me, Mr. MP Brunel Dessert had moved a motion related to the Uyghurs. That motion and the intent of that motion was entirely reflected in that press release. It did not have editorialized language in it as we do in this instance. It did not omit critical information in that press release as we are seeing in this instance. That is to say, Madam Chair, I believe that a violation of privilege has occurred. And I am therefore seeking a remedy to that end. The committee's chair's role, and this is from the Online Privileges and Immunities chapter, and it states, unlike the Speaker, the chair of the committee does not have the power to censure, disorder, or decide questions of privilege. Should a member wish to raise a question of privilege in committee, or should some event occur in committee which appears to be a breach of privilege or contempt, the chair of the committee will recognize the member and hear the question of privilege, or in the case of some incident, suggest that the committee deal with the matter. It goes on to say, Madam Chair, the chair, however, has no authority to rule that a breach of privilege or contempt has occurred. The role of the chair is, in such instances, is to determine whether the matter raised does in fact touch on privilege and is not a point of order, a grievance, or a matter of debate. If the chair is of the opinion that the member's interjection deals with a point of order, a grievance, or a matter of debate, or that the incident is within the powers of the committee to deal with, the chair will rule accordingly, giving reasons. The committee cannot then consider the matter further as a question of privilege. Should a member disagree with the chair's decision, the member can appeal the decision to the committee, and the committee may sustain or overturn the chair's decision. Madam Chair, I do believe, and I'm so sad to say this, that committee members' privilege has been violated. It is not something that I enjoy doing today, but I am very upset about it. We have debated on the issue. I trusted that the process will follow suit, but the end result showed something different. I have a motion ready to, and written out in both French and English, Madam Chair, if you find that this was indeed a breach of privilege.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Just 1 minute, 1 second. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. I'll just suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that I can get the. I just need to get advice before we proceed any further.
Before I said something, or?
Yeah. I just need some advice, and then we
Okay.
will go from there. Okay, thank you. I call the meeting to order. So, in regards to what Ms. Kwan has raised, I would just like to give my ruling on that. On June 7th, 2023, the committee adopted a motion to issue a news release concerning international students who were victims of fraud. The motion indicated that what message the news release should convey, but did not go as far as to require a specific unchanged wording. As is normally the case, our draft was prepared using the best information at the time and seeking to remain faithful to the terms of the motion. The chair used the due and proper discretion to approve this draft based on the chair's interpretation of the motion. While the chair recognizes that certain members are not satisfied with the final form of the news release, and while I'll make sure as chair to endeavor to avoid this situation in the future by consulting the committee. The order of the committee was nevertheless duly carried out. Accordingly, the matter raised by the member does not relate to the privilege. So that's my ruling. Okay, so Ms. Kwan, based on what Ms. Kwan has said, so the question is, we will vote on that. Shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? We will go for a vote on that. Shall the ruling of the chair be sustained?
Mr. Ali,
Yes.
Mr. Daliwal,
Always yes.
Monsieur El Khoury,
Pour.
Madame Lalonde,
Pour.
Ms. Sahota,
Yes.
Mr. Kimich,
No.
Mr. Redekop,
No.
Ms. Rempel Garner,
No.
Mr. Halan,
No.
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe,
No.
Ms. Kwan.
No.
Yeas 5, nays 6.
So this is overturned, and yes, Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much. To that end, Madam Chair, I have a motion that I would like to move, and I have copies of it in both French and English. I'll ask, I'll just pass it
Do you want
down,
me to pass it?
if you will, please. Thank you very much to my very helpful colleague, MP Bruno Dussat. I'll wait for everybody to get a copy of this motion, and my staff is sending it electronically also to the clerk.
I'll suspend the meeting for 2-3 minutes so that all the members can read the motion, and then we will come back. So sorry to both our witnesses. I'll just suspend the meeting for 2 minutes so that the members have the time to review the motion.
Madam Chair, I have my hand up.
Mr. Daliwal. Yes, Mr. Daliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make sure that I thank the officials here, because this was a very, very important issue, very near and dear to me and some of my constituents that we had.
Mr. Daliwal. Sorry for interrupting. It's not a point of order. I am suspending the meeting for 2 minutes so that everyone can look at the motion. Then we will come back. The meeting is suspended. I request all the members to take their seats. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I move that the committee report to the House of Commons the potential breach of privilege resulting from the issuance of a press release by the committee on June 14th, 2023, which altered the language that was adopted in the motion unanimously on June 5th, I believe, 2003, by editorializing the content of the motion, adding additional information that was not part of the original motion, and outright omitting information, including the specific call to waive inadmissibility on the basis of misrepresentation. The motion specifically instructed the committee to issue a news release to, quote, condemn the actions of these fraudulent ghost consultants and to call on the Canadian Border Services Agency to immediately stay pending deportations of affected international students, waive inadmissibility on the basis of misrepresentation, and provide an alternate pathway to permanent status for those impacted, such as the humanitarian and compassionate application process or a broad regularization program. And this was not accurately reflected in the content of the issued press release. Madam Chair, I'll just speak very briefly to it. I don't normally like these procedural games. Those who know me will know that this is not the kind of thing that I do. I don't relish this moment, but I think it is wrong for the work of the committee where we agreed and a motion was passed unanimously, and then for that not to be carried out. The explanation that you provided, Madam Chair, it is deficient. It does not even acknowledge the very premise of the discrepancy that did occur. Is not a matter of interpretation. When the motion very specifically calls for the inadmissibility to be acknowledged and for it to be waived. We debated this matter with respect to the broad regularization program to be made available in the alternate an alternate permanent residency status initiative to be provided for the students. We debated this, and still the press release came out not to reflect that, but rather very much to align with what the government's going to proceed. And that is not acceptable. That's why I'm moving this motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. I have a speaking list. Mr. Reddycop and then Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Point out. Madame la Présidente, rappelez-vous que j'avais demandé.
I had asked to speak, Madam Chair, before you suspend the session. So I asked to speak quite a while ago. I asked it before you suspended, before you made your decision. So I should have been on the list a long time ago.
I will give you after Mr. Reddycop. I gave the floor to him, so we will come to you after that.
No.
Yeah.
Présidente, parce que j'ai vraiment levé ma main.
I raised my hand 10 minutes ago.
So we'll come back to you, Mr. Brunel. Yes, please.
Can we have a copy about the press release to analyze it and understand what was released exactly?
Okay, we will get it to you. Can you email it to everyone?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this motion, a couple thoughts on this. Number one, I agree with what Ms. Kwan is saying. Now, in this specific motion, she highlighted a little bit. When we talked about this at committee, we agreed with part of it. We wanted to make some changes, and quite frankly, we weren't super happy with the final version of this motion, but it was better that than nothing. And so we did agree to it. It was unanimous, as she pointed that out. So I guess the point of that is that it wasn't exactly what we wanted, but it was close enough, and so we went with it. And so I agree with her that I don't think that the way the press release came out at all reflected what was passed by the committee. Now, I may have agreed or disagreed with what it was, with what the press release looked like, but that's not really the point. The point is that the committee made a decision, and whether I agreed with it fully or not is also not the point. But the committee made a decision, and that's how it should have come out. So that's the reason why I agree with this. And another point related to that is I find a bit of a similarity here. As you all know, I moved a motion 4 times to study this issue of international students, and 4 times it was voted down by the NDP and the Liberals. And ultimately what happened was it was kind of it was eventually adopted in a different motion by Ms. Kwan that was massaged and changed into something that was better suited to, I think, probably what the Liberals wanted. And so I guess my point is that it's kind of the same type of thing where we wanted to do something and then it was massaged over time and changed into something else. And that's a little bit like what we're seeing here with this press release. And so that concerns me. So I want to see, if we make a decision, I think we need to do that. And so that's why I am supporting what Ms. Kwan is talking about here.
Mr. Reddycop will go to Brunel Dessep. Mr. Brunel Dessep, sorry for that confusion, because if that time meeting was suspended, so I'll go back. Mr. Brunel Dessep.
That's fine. You're my favorite chair, even if I vote against your decisions. Madam Chair, I think that we only have 5 minutes left in this meeting. Given the resources, we can't go over 6:15. And so I would move to my honorable colleagues to go to a vote immediately if we want to go to something else. Otherwise, we'll have to come back to this. And I guarantee no people are. So I don't. It doesn't look like I'm going to win my point. That's unfortunate because we should do our work, and we know how people are going to vote. I know exactly how my conservative friends will vote. I know exactly how Jenny will vote and how I will vote. And so I think that we should end the committee by doing our job, by voting on this motion and trying not to filibuster, and by making our constituents proud. And this is Quebec Sovereignist telling you this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as I always respect my dear friend Brunel Dessep, but on the other hand, I have to be accountable to my constituents, and I have to make sure that I put the things on record as well. Earlier, Mr. Reddycop mentioned that we Liberals did not support his motion. That was never been the intent. The intent was to make sure that we finish the citizenship bill first and then continue with this study, because this study is equally important. But at the same time, we as a committee members had a legislative agenda in front of us that we needed to finish. And in fact, we exactly know who filibustered that one. I don't need to mention because I don't want to get into argument and on this one. But I can tell you, as soon as that bill was reported to the House, we as a committee started an important work on this issue that the students are facing, and those victim students already have a lot of toll on their minds, and they wanted to clear up many questions that I had the meeting with them on June. And they raised many questions. In fact, I was ready to ask those questions today to the officials from CBSA, so those students can have the first-hand answers from the CBSA. But unfortunately, the way things are going now, I don't think I will be able to get to those questions that students raised. And I can tell you the intent from every member was there to help those students, whether it was Conservative, Liberal, NDP, you name it. But that is not the issue. Issue right now is the victim students who were the victims of this fraudulent scheme, which is very, very important. We need to know what is going to be the process from the CBSA. The CBSA has already said to us that if the student has gone to university, they have completed their education, and they are working in the workplace, and they are not committed into or involved into any criminal activities, those type of students were genuine students. I wanted to make sure that I'm able to ask those questions today from the CBSA, so as the victim students have that information. And I really, Madam Chair, I feel very, very sorry that we all have to go through this. Not only me. In fact, I'm very frustrated today seeing this on all this petty politics. This just for one press release, we are taking the time away from these officials that has come out all the way to give the answers that students want to hear.
Point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente, on parle de la motion.
Point of order, we're talking about the motion on the table. I believe that that's not what my colleague is talking about, and it's now 6:14.
Order, like Mr. Dhaliwal has the floor. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I had to clear it up because I'm really mad and frustrated that we were all here because, in fact, on the mind of every member on this committee was to help those students. Are we helping those students now by bringing in, one motion after the other?
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Dhaliwal. Sorry for interrupting. Just a quick minute. We don't have the resources for this committee available after 6:15. It's already 6:15. So I will have to suspend the meeting and then come back to it on Wednesday. With that, the meeting is suspended.